I live in a small, quiet town in Tennessee, a place where everybody knows each other, and life rarely changes. I've been here all my life, just like my parents and my grandparents before them. But last summer, things took a turn, a wild, unbelievable turn, and it all started on the day I decided to check out an abandoned house at the edge of town. This house wasn't just any old house. It had been sitting there, abandoned for decades, after the original owners disappeared without a trace. It's the kind of place you hear rumors about growing up. Haunted, cursed, that sort of thing. The whole town treats it like a place you stay away from, but I've always been curious. I figured it was just a bunch of old stories to keep kids from wandering into a dilapidated building, but still, there was something about that house that pulled at me. So one hot afternoon in June, with nothing better to do, I hopped on my bike and rode down there. I wasn't expecting much. The plan was to take a quick look, maybe snap some photos, and head back. But as soon as I got close, I knew something was off. The air felt heavier, like the kind of humidity you get before a storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I thought it was just my nerves, but looking back, I should have known better. The front door was hanging off its hinges, creaking in the wind. I stepped inside, and it was like stepping into another world. The house looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but the strange part was that everything was still there. Furniture, photos on the wall, even dishes in the sink, like the owners had just vanished one day and never returned. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I wandered through the living room, kitchen, and hallway, but nothing really happened. At least, not until I made my way upstairs. I had my phone flashlight on since most of the windows were boarded up, and I noticed something strange in one of the bedrooms. The wallpaper was peeling, and underneath, there was some kind of writing. I leaned in closer to read it, and that's when things got weird. The words were old, like really old. They looked like they were written in charcoal or something similar, but the language wasn't English. It wasn't any language I'd ever seen. But the second my eyes hit those symbols, I felt a chill run down my spine. My phone's battery, which had been fully charged, suddenly dropped to 0 and shut off. Then I heard a noise, footsteps, soft but deliberate, like someone was walking just outside the room. I froze. Every instinct in me was screaming to get out, but curiosity got the better of me. I crept toward the door and looked down the hall, and that's when I saw it, a shadow. It wasn't shaped like a person, though. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were long and twisted in ways that made my stomach turn. It was standing at the end of the hallway, just watching me. Before I could react, the shadow moved fast. I turned and bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I nearly tripped over myself as I stumbled down the steps and out the front door, jumping onto my bike and pedaling as fast as I could away from that place. I didn't look back once. By the time I got home, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. My parents asked me what happened, but I couldn't even explain it. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, that there was a logical explanation for everything I'd seen. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. And that was just the beginning. The next few days after visiting that house were a blur. At first, I thought I'd gotten away clean. The shadow, the writing on the walls, the sudden battery drain, all of it had just been some strange coincidence, right? But things started happening. Little things at first, things I could brush off as weird but explainable. It started with my phone. I charged it that night after it died, but it never worked the same again. The battery drained faster than normal, even when I wasn't using it. And every time I opened the camera app, the screen would glitch out, showing static for a second before loading normally. I'd almost convinced myself that the house messed with it somehow, like maybe there was some electromagnetic thing going on that killed my battery. Seemed like a stretch, but it was the best I could come up with. But then it escalated. A couple of days later, I was hanging out with some friends by the lake, telling them about the old house. I didn't mention the shadow or the weird feeling. I didn't want them thinking I'd lost my mind, but I did say it creeped me out. We joked around about it, and they dared me to go back and take more pictures. I laughed it off at first, but I could feel this weird pull, like a voice at the back of my mind whispering, "Go back! You have to go back!" That night, I started dreaming about the house. Every single night, I'd find myself standing in front of it again, the front door wide open, inviting me in. Each dream was the same. I'd walk inside, but this time, I wasn't alone. The shadow was there, always just out of reach, watching me from the corners of the room. And every time, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. After a week of this, I barely slept at all. Then came the day I realized I wasn't just seeing things in my dreams. It was a Friday afternoon, and I'd just gotten home from work when I noticed something out of place. On my bedroom window, there were streaks, like someone had dragged their fingers across the glass. It was subtle, but it made my stomach drop. I lived alone, and no one should have been near that window. I wiped the streaks away and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but I knew deep down that it was starting to follow me. Later that night, I was sitting on my couch, trying to distract myself with TV, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was just spam, but when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, standing in front of the abandoned house. The angle was weird, like it had been taken from the second-floor window. But I hadn't gone back since that first day. How the hell did someone get this photo? I felt my pulse race as I dialed the number, but it didn't go through. No signal. I tried again, but the same thing happened. Panic started to set in. I checked my phone history, my messages, anything that could explain it, but everything looked normal, except for that picture. I deleted it immediately, hoping that would make it stop. It didn't. For the next few days, things escalated fast. I'd hear knocks on my door in the middle of the night, but no one was there when I checked. The temperature in my house dropped so low that I could see my breath, even though it was the middle of summer. And then, the shadow appeared again. I was sitting at my kitchen table, eating dinner, when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was my reflection in the window, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't me. It was the shadow, standing outside my house, watching me. Its limbs were still twisted, unnaturally long, and its head tilted to one side like it was studying me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? But how could I explain this? "Excuse me, officer, there's a shadowy figure standing outside my house." Yeah, that'd go over well. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my phone, trying to snap a picture, but just like before, the screen went static. The shadow didn't move, didn't come closer. It just stood there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What had I unleashed by going to that house? I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with me yet. It wanted something, and I was terrified to find out what that was. I decided I needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them, old Mrs. Hensley, the town's unofficial historian. She knew more about that house than anyone. The next day, I went to her place, and after some coaxing, she told me the story. The house had belonged to a man named Gerald Morris, a doctor who moved to our town in the early 1900s. He'd been well liked at first, but then strange things started happening. Patients disappearing, unexplained illnesses. And then one day, Morris himself vanished, along with his entire family. Rumor had it that he'd been experimenting with something dark, something unnatural. Mrs. Hensley said no one dared go near the house after that, But those who did always reported seeing the same thing, a shadow, watching from the windows. "Whatever you do," she told me, "don't go back there. It's already got its eyes on you." I wanted to believe she was just spinning another ghost story. But after everything I'd seen, I wasn't so sure anymore. Mrs. Hensley's warning echoed in my mind as I left her house, but deep down, I knew there was no escaping it. The shadow wasn't going to leave me alone. And the worst part? I didn't even know what it wanted. For days, I tried to go back to my normal life, pretending everything was fine, but the signs were impossible to ignore. The shadow wasn't just haunting my dreams anymore, it was everywhere. Every time I walked past a reflective surface, I'd catch glimpses of it, lurking just behind me. Doors would creak open by themselves, lights would flicker on and off, and the temperature in my house dropped even lower. It was like the air itself was thick with dread. I was living in a constant state of fear, barely sleeping, barely eating. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The rational part of me still wanted to think this was all in my head, but I knew better. Something was after me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before it did more than just watch. One night, after another sleepless stretch, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to face it, whatever it was. The only way to stop this nightmare was to go back to where it all started, the abandoned house. I drove out there around dusk, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as the old, decrepit house came into view. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the yard, but the house looked exactly the same. Empty, silent, waiting. I parked my car a few feet away and just sat there for a moment, trying to calm the growing panic in my chest. I had no plan, no idea what I was even looking for, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots as I approached the front door. It was eerily quiet, no sounds of birds, no wind, nothing. Just the heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to hang over the property like a curse. I pushed open the front door, half expecting it to fall off the hinges, but it swung open smoothly, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it, down to the unsettling arrangement of the furniture, untouched by time. I made my way upstairs, heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I didn't know what I was looking for, but something deep inside told me it was in that room, the one with the strange writing on the wall. As I reached the top of the stairs, my flashlight began to flicker. I stopped in my tracks, listening. The air felt thick, heavy, like the atmosphere was pressing down on me. And then, just like before, I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the room at the end of the hall. I don't know why, but I forced myself to walk forward. Every part of me screamed to turn and run, but something inside pushed me toward the room. I reached the doorway and hesitated for a split second before stepping inside. The room was empty, but the writing on the walls, the symbols that had given me that terrible chill the first time, was different now. It was glowing, faint but unmistakable, like it had been freshly scrawled. And then, in the center of the room, I saw it, a single chair, facing the window where I had seen the shadow in my dreams. I felt cold, my breath visible in the air as I stepped closer, and that's when I realized the truth. The shadow wasn't just some entity attached to the house. It wasn't Gerald Morris, or a ghost, or anything like that. It was something much older, much darker. It had been waiting for someone, waiting for me to come back. Before I could react, the temperature in the room plummeted. My flashlight flickered once more, and then died completely, plunging the room into darkness. And that's when I saw it, moving in the reflection of the window. The shadow. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was standing right behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, and for the first time, I saw it up close. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs stretched and twisted like a tree stripped of its bark. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a dark void, eyes hollow and empty, but somehow watching me with a terrible, hungry focus. I backed up, stumbling over the chair as it moved closer. My voice was gone, locked tight in my throat as the shadow reached out one long, crooked arm toward me. And then, just as its fingers brushed against my skin, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the room, sunlight streaming through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The shadow was gone. The house was quiet, still. And for the first time in weeks, the air felt normal. I don't know how long I stayed there, just lying on the floor, trying to piece together what had happened. All I knew was that the weight, the sense of being watched, was gone. Whatever the shadow was, it wasn't haunting me anymore. It had taken something, left something behind. I wasn't sure what, but I felt different. Lighter. I left the house that day and never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the lights flicker just right, I still catch a glimpse of something in the corners of my vision. Just for a moment. A shadow. Watching. It hasn't taken me yet. But I know it's still out there, waiting for the right time.